When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
Welcome back to day 4 of the 25 days of Winds of Winter. This is totally the first time we're recording this. If we're going to be talking about Bowen Marsh and the Betrayers, I'm joined by JC, the Advocate. And if you'd like to introduce yourself, JC, feel free to.
Yeah, of course. Hey guys, Advocate here, BookTube Advocate on YouTube. Happy to be here with my good pal, the Grease Goblins, discussing some Bowen Marsh stuff in the Night's Watch.
Hell yeah. So we're going to be doing some predictions. We're going to look at where do we leave with these characters in Dance Dragons? Where did that logically mean they might end up in the Winds of Winter? Will they die, be imprisoned? What's going to happen with them overall? That's the point of the video. And so let's get into A Dance with Dragons a little bit, kind of do a little bit of a recap. So at the end of A Dance with Dragons, we're kind of in this situation where we have multiple different factions that none of them are working well together. Jon specifically does not seem to have the love of the Queen's Men, and Selyse specifically, she's not too thrilled with Jon sending the Hardhome expedition and then maybe going south. And then also you have the Wildlings and the Night's Watch who are at each other's throats, and Jon's trying to balance that, but he's not really pleasing the Night's Watch at all. And that ends up leading to his death. And so now that the years have gone by, we don't necessarily know what's going to happen there. What's going to happen to these people that betrayed Jon? Are they going to be imprisoned, killed, any of that kind of stuff? So at this point, I want to go over to you, JC. In the immediate aftermath, what do you think is going to happen with this plotline?
Yeah, I think it's, as you said, obviously we've got a lot of things going on here with the death of Jon Snow. We've got the death of the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, so it won't be any form of organization. I think there will be a giant ruckus between the Wildlings, who, after hearing Jon Snow's speech about how they need to retake Winterfell, will be kind of hopped up on all this adrenaline. And then immediately after that, learning of the death of Jon Snow, they will want to do something about the people who did this to Jon Snow. So I do think there will be some immediate blowback from the Wildlings. As far as what happens to Bowen Marsh and his kind of group of betrayers, I do think quite a few of the betrayers will be killed from the immediate blowback by the Wildlings, but I think Bowen Marsh, at least for the time, whilst Jon Snow is still quote unquote dead, he'll be maybe just captured and or just held hostage for now.
Agreed. I think that makes a lot of sense. And you got to put it into context of, okay, Dance with Dragons, the Wildlings, basically, their only protector is Jon. Like, the Night's Watch do not like them. There is, like, a lot of tensions brewing between both sides. And so when Jon dies, it's kind of like, okay, well, what's stopping now the Night's Watch from trying to kill us all? Like, you know, one night when we're sleeping, them come and just kill us. That's how I would be feeling. And especially when you have Jon, who he just got them all hyped up. We're going to war, baby. We're going to go get Mance back. We're going to go to Winterfell. We're going to take out these evil Boltons, all that kind of stuff. And now he's dead. And especially from the Night's Watchmen, the people that are supposed to have his back, there's definitely going to be blowback. And in the show, we saw a scenario in which, you know, Tormund and all that, they basically got the Wildlings, took out Alistair Thorne, all that. I don't think it's going to be as clean as that. I think it's going to be a lot more messy. I think there are going to be people that are not going to just, you know, stop fighting and are going to fight the Wildlings to the bitter end. I don't think Bowen Marsh is one of those people, because he's been somebody that shows himself to not be that kind of fighter, like fight or die type character. I think he will very much will be imprisoned for what he's done, more or less, kind of leading the coalition against Jon and having him killed. And it is really a tough situation because in the book, it is more emotional. Bowen Marsh and a lot of people that kill him like have tears in their eyes. They're a lot more personally connected to Jon. They don't like hate his guts, but they think he's leading the Watch in the wrong direction that could get them killed. And so I think that leads to a really interesting like point of like when Jon comes back. At whatever point you believe he's going to come back in the story, if he does, JC, how do you think like Jon's reactions to those people are going to be in terms of the betrayers, maybe Bowen Marsh, whoever's left?
Well, I know you've discussed this in other videos, Grease, but I don't think when Jon Snow does inevitably come back and is resurrected back into his original body, I don't think he'll be the same Jon Snow that he was previously. As we've seen evidenced by Lady Stoneheart and Catelyn. Lady Stoneheart, despite physically still being Catelyn Stark, mentally is a completely different person from who she was prior to the Red Wedding. She is vindictive, bent on revenge, bent on vengeance, and is a completely different person as far as we're concerned. Jon Snow will have some differences compared to who he was prior to his death. I don't think they'll be as drastic as Catelyn, where Catelyn, the last thing she did was, wish death upon the Freys and Lannisters. I think Jon Snow, the last thing he experienced before, the last thing he said before dying and taking that last knife wound to the chest was ghost. So he wasn't exactly in a vengeful mindset prior to his death. However, I do think having spent, we're not sure how much time he'll spend in Ghost, but even spending a couple days within Ghost will change him mentally. We've already seen evidence of this with Bran Stark. Whenever Bran wargs into his direwolf, Jojen Reed always tells him, don't spend too much time in the direwolf. One day the wolf will become the person and the man will just become nothing. And Jon Snow, I think, will definitely teeter into that as he spends more time in Ghost. He'll become more of the wolf. So when he inevitably gets resurrected as into his own body, a lot of those animalistic instincts, those animalistic urges will stick with Jon, and that will then play into how he treats with his betrayers, including Bowen Marsh. I'm not sure that he'll be as vengeful as Catelyn, but he'll definitely have something nasty to say, perhaps something nasty to do to Bowen Marsh when time comes around.
Agreed. I think just the way George writes those type of characters, the issues he has with Gandalf being brought back in Lord of the Rings, I think he will be changed to some degree. We're just not sure like what level of will he be changed. I personally think he will be a lot more like not to Lady Stoneheart level, but I think he'll be a bit more vengeful. I believe the idea of like being assassinated by people that he was trying to lead, like his brothers, it was going to very much alter the way he perceives people. Like, will he be a little bit more paranoid? Will he be somebody that struggles with leadership? Because now he's realizing, okay, if I make a decision that people don't like, is that going to lead me to the same spot? Am I going to die again? Are these people going to betray me? And I think that's going to really play into the character of Jon specifically. And so when you think about the aftermath specifically of Jon's death, then you have this chaotic situation where we've had it foreshadowed pretty much all of Dance that the Wildlings have more numbers than the Night's Watch. The idea of them more or less just being like, okay, we're not going to take it anymore. You pushed out Jon. We have the numbers. Let's take over the castle. Let's do whatever. I wonder then, is the response going to be, if you're Bowen Marsh, if you're a higher official, okay, we need to alert Eastwatch. We need to alert the Shadow Tower because this is a state of the Night's Watch might cease to exist if we don't control the situation quickly. And so I wonder, JC, like, what do you have any thoughts on that? Of like, will they get outside help? Will that factor in at all on the situation at Castle Black?
I'm not sure if there will be any outside help as far as like the other castles are concerned along the Night's Watch. It would take, even if Castle Black sends a raven to the nearest castles along the wall, it would take quite a while for forces from those other castles to get to Castle Black in order to assist them. And at this point in the story, I just don't. That feels like another one of those things where George R. R. Martin is adding another plot point. It's like, all right, now let's add this plot point of people from the other castles making their way towards Castle Black in this infinite sea of plot points that we already have in the Winds of Winter. I think that's just one plot point too many. I don't think George should be pursuing that. And as far as I'm concerned, I think it should just be the Wildlings versus the Night's Watch in Castle Black, and that's it. And then potentially the Queensmen getting involved, but maybe the Queensmen leaning slightly more towards assisting the Wildlings than assisting the Night's Watch, as Queen Selyse has proven in A Dance with Dragons that she is willing to have the Wildlings come south of the wall in order to assist Stannis with his efforts.
Yeah, Selyse is more like, hey, if I'm not going to lose men, if I'm not going to lose ships, all the Wildlings that come south, they can come south as long as they back Stannis or whatnot. So, yeah, I definitely could see Selyse also backing the Wildlings, given the Night's Watch have not done nearly enough in Selyse's eyes for her to be like, oh, yeah, I'm totally for them. Jon's even gone against her in a couple moments in terms of characters like, for instance, Val. He lets her go and all that, which just ends up being good, right? Saves Wildlings' lives. But for Selyse, she's not very happy about stuff like that. And so, yeah, I think that's another part of it is how do the Queensmen, all that faction play into it. I think Melisandre, she is going to be our main POV into that plot line. I think she becomes kind of the peace broker type esque character while Jon is gone, in terms of she has connections to both wildlings and the Night's Watch. People also fear her, and that gives her power. So there's going to be that level of it as well. How does Melisandre factor into everything? Is she an active player? Is she more of just a point of view showing us what's happening around her? Still left up to be decided. But when we get to the actual fates of Bowen Marsh specifically, what do you think his fate is going to be, JC? I know for me personally, I think that he will be executed by Jon. I think he will be one of the last prisoners saved, and then Jon comes back. I think there will be that confrontation between the two, and he will be killed. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on where do you think Bowen Marsh, maybe some of the other higher officers, end up.
Yeah, I think the other high officers are going to get killed off immediately after the blowback from the wildlings, after Jon Snow's deaths. I think they're taken care of. As far as Bowen Marsh is concerned, hearing you talk about it, I think I am of the mindset now where I think Bowen Marsh will also get executed. Originally, I was thinking, well, Bowen Marsh didn't really, he went along with it, but he
Yeah.
was the saddest member of the betrayers group. He had a tear in his eye when he stabbed Jon Snow. But the series is also all about consequences. Whether or not you felt bad about what you did, he still did a bad thing. And I think that will have some sort of consequences. And as we saw from the beginning of A Dance of Dragons, where Jon Snow was willing to execute Janos Slynt for any talkback, I think Jon Snow will have the same sort of zero tolerance policy on any sort of treasonous behavior, even if Bowen Marsh was a friend of his. So I do think, after hearing you talk about it, I do think Jon Snow, a resurrected, more animalistic Jon Snow, will have kind of that same zero tolerance mentality, and maybe even more bit of a more animalistic urge without delving too deeply into the Catelyn Lady Stoneheart vengeance. He'll still be a little bit more feral than what he was before, and will execute Bowen Marsh.
And I mean, even like going a little further on that idea, when you think about Bowen Marsh, the ironic part about them killing Jon is they're killing Jon because Jon broke his vow, but then they are also breaking their own vows by killing another member. That's their brother. So even if you want to come at it from that point, a legal standpoint, Jon has every right to execute Bowen Marsh. So I do think like that's the overall conclusion. And I think almost all of these, especially with minor characters, that their roles in the story seem to be shrinking. Like their point in the story is starting to kind of wind down. Those are the characters I always point to. It's like, George, let's kill this character. We need to shrink the cast, shrink it, and then just start going. And so I do agree. I think the real question I have with really this entire plot line is, how long is Jon, quote unquote, dead for? Because that really will delay the ability for that plot to progress. If he's dead for a third, a half of the book, some people have gone even further than that, which I think is, I don't know if I'd go that far, but that's going to delay the ability for the North to rally behind someone. Like, we have the Stannis plot, but I am not somebody that's expecting Stannis to live through much more of the series. So, JC, like, what do you think? I know this isn't about Jon, but at what point of the book, if we get it, do you think we would see Jon come back?
That's a really hard question. If we're talking about the modern day George R. R. Martin, the A Dance with Dragons writer George R. R. Martin, the George R. R. Martin who likes to garden out plots and write and world build, which is fun and I still enjoy, but he's less of the George R. R. Martin from the first three books, who was more about characters and a slightly more concise plot. I don't foresee Jon Snow being resurrected until maybe the 3/4 point, maybe closer to the end. I'm hoping George has learned his lesson from A Dance of Dragons and is like, I can't keep doing this. I have to, narrow the scope of the story down further and further. So I'm hoping he's learned lessons and is able to narrow it down to the point where Jon Snow gets resurrected much earlier, maybe the halfway point, maybe the third point. I'm not sure, but realistically, I don't know. Considering the modern day George R. R. Martin, I'm willing to think it'll be later as opposed to earlier.
JC, I can already tell you, you're going to get some hate comments for that. I gotten at least 20 hate comments just insinuating that Dance with Dragons in any way is a less efficient George. But regardless, I think sometimes, even when I'm predicting these, I think about George in book 1, where like Bran's in a coma for a very, very small stretch of that book, and then he's back. Yeah, you got a point. If he meanders around and we have like 5 Ariane travel chapters, I mean, yeah, John might not be back for a while.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but thank you for coming on as always, JC. I think both of our opinions have kind of gotten to the point where it's like these betrayers, more than likely, if they don't die, they're going to face some sort of consequences.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we're at. So check out JC's channel. You know, JC's going to be joining us, or we're going to be joining all of each other. We're going to have a big group for a Night of the Seven Kingdoms for the reviews afterwards. And so thank you guys all for watching, and we will see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.
See ya.